I love that it's standalone issues right now. A lot of them are just completely green to comic book reading. So having the variety so that they can find what they like.
I think this whole experience has helped me grow a lot.
Like it just gives you the starting point of like having a really good discussion.
Yeah, I think art really functions like mirrors.
Welcome back to Is It Canon? My name is Anne, this is Tom, and we have Jim Rugg back. Jim, it is so good to see you again.
It's great to see you guys. Thank you for having me back.
Do you know that your episode is our most watched one?
Oh, that's flattering. I didn't know that. That's great.
I was just checking. I had the same thought, Ann, and I just checked. We are 8 views away from 1,000. That'll be our first view for that. So our first video to cross 1,000. So please, if you're listening, go check that out too. Get us over that 1,000. But yeah, shout out to Jim.
Yeah, you pushed Andy was our highest one, and you pushed him off the throne. So
I can't believe that DJ isn't the top viewer getter.
You know why? I think the first one, he was our first guest. It was episode 2. So we're just starting.
You have to bring him back on, but not right away. Let me enjoy being the top guest for a little bit.
You got it.
It's going to be a rivalry. I love that. But like last time we talked, you had done cover B for Gary B.
Gary B.
You were very fresh into VeeFriends, or into like the team. It kind of just started. And since then, you have done Astronaut and Alien, Minakawa, Farm Fights, and now the Cobra. So 4 comics and 3 in a row. Like, that's impressive. How was it to have to do 3 in a row?
You know, the way this stuff works, because I wrote 3 of those and I drew 1 of them. Mm-hmm. So I was actually doing them all at once. It was cool that they were released the way they were. You know, when we were... whenever they started to be released and we were making comics now on YouTube, we talked about how like the next 5 or 6 weeks, it's the Jim Rugg show, you know, because like we talked to the creators who are involved in the new releases. And, you know, I had my name on 3 of them in a row. So it was a lot of me talking.
Do you have I know it's hard to pick favorites, but do you have a favorite one that you felt a lot like you?
It is hard to pick favorites. My favorite is always the one that usually that I'm working on or that I just finished, more likely, because when you're working on them, you never know how it's going to turn out. Mm-hmm. But once it's finished, like I'm really happy with Cobra. But I'm also really happy with Farm Fights. I love Alien. I love Minakawa. I don't know, you know, there's parts of me in all of them. Like anything you create, you're going to have parts of you in it in one way or another. And I identify with so many of these characters. You know, when people ask like, who's your favorite V-friend, it's often hard to answer because name one and I probably, you know, relate to it in some way or, you know, like something about it. I don't know. I don't know. And I'm really happy with those 4 comics that we've named. I'm really happy with how they turned out and for different reasons. So I'm not sure. Confident Cobra is fresh, and I like how he sort of defends his family and you know, stands up for him and says he'll help out with job interview prep and stuff like that. I really like that character trait, you know, of kind of looking out for his loved ones. So it's fresh in my mind. I'll go with Cobra. Also, it's such an unlikely character to be like looking out for his family and, you know, sort of this family stand-up guy, because Cobras are so terrifying looking in person.
But also,
so true.
All the comics you made are also so different.
Yeah. Like
I think almost for very different target groups too, like very different types of stories. And I feel like that makes it really cool for us to see the variety of your guys' art and storytelling, like how many different directions you guys can actually, like that just shows how good of a writer and artist you guys are to just be able to dive into so many different subjects and so many different genres almost.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I love variety. I always tell people the easiest way to hire me is to ask me to do something I haven't done before. And, you know, with comics, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of focus. And then when you're done with it, like, I want to do something else. And so much of comics is not that way. Like, Tom, you're a longtime comics fan and reader.
Right.
We did Comics Pro in January, VeeFriends. So DJ and I were there and a couple of members of our team. And we talked to comic book retailers and we're showing them VeeFriends and trying to see how they fit in the comic book store market. And one of the things they said is, this doesn't work well for us because we have subscription model where like someone will say, I love Amazing Spider-Man, put Amazing Spider-Man in my box every time a new issue comes out. And as a reader, you expect it to look a certain way, like the previous issue. And, you kind of expect a certain sameness. And I understand that, I followed characters and things, but I love the variety. Like as an artist and as a fan of comics and the art form of comics, that's my favorite thing is like, show me something I haven't seen before. And it's one of the things that attracted me to VeeFriends. When DJ approached me, there was I don't know, I think they had about 6 issues done and I read them and they all felt different, like you said. And so I think that it's testament to the various creators that have been making them. But I also think it's testament to Gary and the characters. There's such a broad range of these characters and they're good characters, which means you can do kid stories, you can do adult stories, you can do sad, like there's really no limit there. And I think as a artist, storyteller, like that's what you want, is to be able to sort of bring some creativity to it. And there are a lot of characters that you can really put in these different situations.
And I think it helps for somebody like me who is a new comic reader to be exposed to different genres of comics. Like if it's the Gary B one where there's like very minimal text in the beginning, very like was not something I knew about, to more text heavier ones like story, like there's just so many different things that it really helps me to see what do I actually like when it comes to comics, to then be able from there on out to look into other comics. Like, okay, I really like this comics of VeeFriends. What is something that I can ask Tom? Like, what do you think is similar to like when it comes to one of the Spider-Mans or one of the, like, what do you think I would like if I like this comic? And I think that's going to be really interesting for all the new people coming into comics.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, conversely, and Tom, you can speak to this. One of the things we found at comics, talking to the retailers, is that VeeFriends is really different than, say, a lot of the stuff in comic book stores, especially like New Comic Book Day. It's the Batmans and the Spider-Mans or, the top Marvel and DC characters. And so there are a lot of books like those 2 books. And VeeFriends really, is very different than those books and that model. And so I feel like even if you're a long time comic book reader, you can find something different and something new in VeeFriends comics. So, we continue to try to just raise awareness and get this comic in front of both new readers and longtime comics fans as much as we can. And it seems like it's working, we are selling out of back issues, so it seems like things are going well on that front, and I'm excited for it. I love the idea of making new comics readers. That's kind of a goal of mine in life. And again, one of the many things that attracted me to VeeFriends is that opportunity.
It's kind of our goal too. I have no artistic ability, 0. So this is my only way that I could try to like convince people to read comics if they haven't, is by talking about it and what I like about it, and her perspective brings it. And hopefully I think it's worked on a much smaller scale. I think people who have listened in are like, oh, if nothing else, they'll go back and reread an issue they may have read prior to us talking about it and now looking at it a little bit differently. But the variety is so great because I think like Gary and you guys know that VeeFriends, a lot of people are just Gary followers, right? They loved Gary. They're following his journey through entrepreneurship, business, garage selling, whatever he's got going on, they're following him. And so people got into cards because Gary was into cards and said, so now him talking about comics and creating a comics team and all that, he knows that a lot of them are just completely green to comic book reading. So having the variety so that they can find what they like, it almost feels very strategic and smart to do so, because knowing that, having a early comic be a little bit darker and for mature audiences, for the people that are like, oh, they're just going to make kiddie, younger audience comics only. And then it's like, well, here you go early on too. So it's like, we're not sticking to one thing. And I get what you're saying, like the greatest hits, right? This thing worked. Let's do that over and over and over again because it works. And it still works. People are still buying Batman and Spider-Man, regardless of who's writing, where he's at. And like they both have gotten into really like bizarre storylines that you're like, what am I reading? But it doesn't matter because it's Batman and Spider-Man that people will buy it. So yeah, I mean, for it being so early, it's just the variety is awesome. And as a reader, I do like long stories. I do. 12, 24, even 48 issue runs. It's fun. But also I'm having a blast every week or every couple weeks. It's a brand new thing going in because you don't need to know backlog like you do with sometimes with Spider-Man or any of the big titles. So I love that it's standalone issues right now, and I'm excited for the future of continuity of a single character.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm saying it's funny, because we have these conversations and they're sort of out of time. I can't talk about what I had meetings about today and the comics that are in the works right now, but I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say that we are working on longer stories in a variety of formats. So that'll be coming too. And again, Tom, to your point, people that want to dive into like, I love this character and I want to see the epic with this character, we will be serving that as well. It's those take longer, and part of, honestly, I haven't been told all the strategies. I don't know why we didn't jump in with one character as a long series, but I suspect it's because this is a way to put these characters in front of people and see how they respond. Gary's a marketer, like that's sort of what he does in his day job is here are strategies, what is actually effective. And so I feel like, part of doing all these different characters in shorter stories is a chance to like see how readers react to them, what resonates, what connects. And traditionally that's how comic books have worked. When you think about Spider-Man or Batman, they started out in books that were not called Spider-Man or Batman. It's issue 15 of Amazing Fantasy. Spider-Man shows up and guess what? Fans loved him, so you get more Spider-Man. Kind of the same thing with Batman. So I think it's probably consistent across many industries that you sort of approach a new product or a new idea and it's like, see what actually sticks,
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong. You would know better than me, Jim. Like, I think Amazing Fantasy was like already scheduled to be canceled, and so Stan Lee was just like, well, let's just throw in Spider-Man. Then I've had this idea, so like, if it's gonna go, let's just throw it in, and it just blew up, right?
Yeah, like an instant hit. As soon as it was released, that book sold out, and that's what they were gauging sales numbers by at the time. Like newsstand distribution and what comes back. None of those Amazing Fantasies came back.
Right.
It was a hit pretty much overnight.
It's a cool story.
Last time you were on here, you were super excited because you had just gotten the cover art and you couldn't show us. Was it the Sienkiewicz one?
It was indeed.
It had to be. I thought you were about to do that again, saying I can't talk about that. I'm like, don't you do it again, Jim.
Well, we've had so many great cover artists, and we talked about Cobra to start off. Jeff Darrow does the cover variant for Cobra, and I mean, these are wish fulfillment artists for me. Like one of the other many fun parts of VeeFriends is that part. Like whenever we're going through and saying, who do we want to work with? It's been amazing. Like there haven't been very many no's, it's been a lot of positive feedback and incredible artists. I feel so lucky to be able to actually work with some of these people. And Bill Sienkiewicz is, very, very high on my list.
Just my face when DJ's the one who told us. And I was just like, he said it almost like as if it was a hypothetical because we didn't know yet. And so he was like, just say Bill Sienkiewicz. And I was just like, yeah, right. Wait, are you saying? And he was like, yeah. I was like, no way. That's crazy.
Why do you feel these like artists that can kind of pick and choose their own projects and not have to say yes to anything, say yes to VeeFriends?
I think some of it is because they're different. It's something new and they're artists, like they want to do new stuff. If you follow Bill Sienkiewicz's career or if you watch videos of him drawing and painting, like he is just like exploding with creative energy. Halfway through a drawing, it may not look at all like what it looks like when it's finished, because that's just, I think, the way he's always created. So I think when something new shows up in front of them, it's maybe a challenge. It may be a chance to try something they haven't tried before. We do a lot of don't know, outreach. I don't know if that's the right word, but like where we'll contact artists, not even with the job in mind, but just to kind of talk to them and tell them about VeeFriends. And it's amazing, like who these artists are in terms of, we know them mostly as fans, you know, it might be artists I've never talked to before. And whenever you actually talk to them, they're very smart business people, you know, which makes sense. You know, artists are sort of entrepreneurs, and, you know, if they're successful, they're able to do the business side of it as well as the creative. And whenever they see VeeFriends and they kind of see the concepts, the way it clicks with these artists is really interesting because they come at it from different angles. Like artists who have worked with famous IP will talk about kind of the IP part of it, of what we're trying to build. Other artists that maybe are known for things like Batman and Spider-Man types will look at them as like these different types of characters that they haven't worked with before. So it's just, you know, I think it's an opportunity. It's a challenge. It's something different. And I know, speaking personally, like I said, that's how you get my attention, is come to me with something I haven't done before, you know, because it's really exciting I think for creative people. I
wonder if it's partly also the openness that you guys bring to the artists. Like all the cover artists we've talked to were always like, we had pretty much free range. Like they told us a little bit about the story and like the character, and then we could just go for it. And I think that's exciting for an artist too, to just like not have restrictions of something having to look a certain way or certain characters being on there, like how you can make something happen and like just fully dive into your creativity. I think it's very enticing for artists too.
I used to teach, and, you know, like I've been doing art in some form or another professionally for 25 years. And so I've done a lot of freelance, and I say there's 3 types of freelance work. One is they hire you because they know exactly what they want. And that's a good client, you know, that you can work with them pretty well. And then one will know it when they see it and like run away from that person as fast as you can. That's not a good client. And the other one is they hire you because they like your work and they want you to be you. And the artists that we work with, that's the case. You know, I mean, like if we're doing a book about Alien, we need you to draw Alien on the cover, but yes, draw it like Bill Sienkiewicz. You know, that's why we've hired you. You know, if we wanted to look a certain way, we could do that. You know, we can do that in-house or whatever. So yeah, that's definitely our philosophy. If we're hiring you, you know, we want you to be you. That's why we know you. So come show off, you know, make this character your own distinct style and make it, you know, make a cool cover.
Which is super cool. I feel like if you put all the cover A's and cover B's just next to each other, the variety of art is insane.
It is.
Like it's just everything, which is cool too, because people are going to be drawn to different covers and different art styles. And that's, again, somebody's going to see a cover and gonna now explore the comic because of that cover too. Like that's especially somebody like me who's new. I don't know anything about the stories. When I go into a comic book store, I look at the covers. So like having a different variety, you're more likely to attract you find one style that somebody's going to be into, having so many different ones. So I think it's super cool that you guys are doing that. That it's not that the characters don't have to look like they originally looked. Like they all can look a little bit different. If it's on the cover or inside, I think it's cool for us too, especially if you've been around on VeeFriends for a while. Like, you know, the series 1 and series 2 characters. That's the typical what's in your head. And now if it's in the comics or a lot of like even on the cards and stickers, you guys are going away from it, which I love. I feel like it just gives you such a big variety of what this character can be. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. I agree with you 100%. That was, as a young comics reader, that was something that caught my imagination really quickly. Like Wolverine was one of my favorite characters when I started reading comics, and they would have often they would have a pinup on the back, and it would be Wolverine Gallery, and it'd be by a different artist. And they would be wildly different than maybe what was in that issue of that comic book. And pretty quickly, like I started to recognize, oh, I have a favorite artist. I want to see their version of Wolverine, you know, or their version of the Hulk or whatever character. And I think that's always stuck with me, you know, like it's part of what makes it fun. And I think for comic book characters, especially, because like fictional characters, you know, they change and they grow, like in a novel or in a movie. comic books, they don't really work that way. You know, it's sort of like at the end of Spider-Man, Peter Parker still needs to sort of be the Peter Parker that he started as, because we're going to do thousands of issues. And I think the way those characters become real is by having different artists put their spin on how they look. And pretty soon you have like this super, you know, gallery, well-rounded version of this character that one is maybe friendlier to young readers. One is something that adults read and resonate, you know, Batman Dark Knight Returns, for example, and just everything in between, you know, and it's part of what makes those characters feel real. You know, you could see like the Batman 60s TV show is a version of Batman, you know, and even though it's kind of all the same, it's Bruce Wayne, you know, and middle age fighting crime, but each one looks different, and it just makes the characters kind of feel real. And I think, you know, again, the more interpretations of these characters, I think the more likely we are to have these characters resonate with fans.
And I think it's also inspiring, like having my daughter is into art, and like being able to show her this is a character and here are like 10 different versions of that character, shows her like, even if I can't draw that, the original character, seeing that there's so many different versions, I can make my own version. I feel like it's inspiring for new young artists to put your own spin on it. Like it was for you with Wolverine, seeing your favorite artist and now inspiring you, like, I can make my own version of Wolverine. It doesn't always have to look that way. I think that's an inspiring thing for kids or upcoming artists to like see that it doesn't always have to be the same. Like it's okay
I love
to
that.
be different.
I hope a lot of people feel that way. I'll be honest, it's not something I had thought of until this conversation, but I agree with it 100%. And it's such a good lesson for, like you say, it doesn't have to be kids. Anybody that decides they want to draw,
Yep.
you know, I think any creative act is a positive thing. And, you know, maybe always, but especially in today's world, I feel like having a little bit of that, some outlet each day where you're doodling or doing something that's just kind of making something is a positive. And so many people get frustrated when they start drawing because what they have in their head isn't necessarily what they end up with on the paper or on the iPad or wherever they're drawing. And I always say, like, you have to learn to evaluate the drawing on its own merit and not compared to some ideal perfect image that you had in your head before you started.
I think part of it, we all learn like in school that this is how a human is supposed to look, or like the animal is supposed to look. And like, we don't really go away from that unless you're like a really good teacher who's like open for that kind of stuff. So
I taught a comics class in Denmark for a couple of years, and it was like, I don't know, a senior class, and it was a portfolio class. So like I would go in and I would look at like the work that these students had done for 4 years, and they were incredible. Like many of them had gone to a drawing academy before they started this program. They were spectacular. And every single one would start out and tell me, I know this isn't how comics are supposed to look. And after hearing that from like literally the best, you know, young cartoonist I'd ever seen, I made them all send me, because we would meet in the morning. It was like a full day class every day. And we would meet in the morning and maybe I'd do like a little lecture or something. I had them all send me 2 pieces of comic art of like artists they, you know, not their art, but somebody they read. And I said, send me one of what, you know, comics are supposed to look like and send me one that isn't. And I would show them to the whole group and I would ask, like, show of hands, is this how comics are supposed to look? It was all over the map. All they knew is that their work didn't look like comics were supposed to look, but there was no consensus as to what comics were supposed to look like. And I realized, like, I think everybody has some of that, you know, like I'll meet artists that I idolize, you know, and they still have that same kind of insecurity that young artists will have, where it's like, oh, it doesn't look the way it's supposed to look. And it's like, what's it supposed to look like? You know, maybe the act is just in the drawing and it doesn't even matter what the end result is.
And I feel like so many adults stop drawing because they feel like it doesn't look like how everybody else looks or how it's supposed to look. And so they stop. But I love that we've seen a couple of people in the community start drawing again because of like DJ's drawing streams, or now seeing the comics and like trying to make their own comics and like getting back to like, I used to love drawing and I stopped because it didn't look like anybody else's. And I'm like, now they're going back to, it's just going to look like me, and being okay with that. And I love that because I feel like there is an artist in all of us. Like, storytelling is part of the human experience, and you don't have to be good at it, because what the heck is good? you know, like you go into an art gallery and we're all gonna like different things because we're drawn to different paintings and stuff. I was like, but I love like people getting back into doing any kind of art, and just now we just have to get this guy back into it too.
Is that supposed to be me?
You're pointing
Pointed
on
off
my
the
screen.
screen.
You're pointing the wrong.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm not the other one. Tom can't draw.
I'm a better art collector. So are you familiar with jam pieces? I don't know. That's what I call them. Okay.
Yes.
So I want to, where is it? Just because you mentioned Wolverine, I completed this one. So I like printed it out. And this is for the reason you just said, this is what I want to see, all of the different artists and their style. And yes, they're doing different versions of Wolverine, obviously. But like, I was like, which one do you want to do? And they're like, I want to do Herb Trimpe. I want to do Weapon X. I want to do, you know, and I'm just like, cool, go for it. As long as it's not there. That's the only limitation, is I don't want to duplicate. And then I was saving this last square at the bottom. And then I went to a convention where Chris Claremont was there, and I was going to have him just sign it. And he was like, can I do word bubble in that bottom square? I'm like, yeah, that's a better idea than I had.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's a
cool?
great example, though, of how characters evolve and change, and how over time they become, I think, more real because they have kind of these experiences.
I love it. So, yeah, I'm a better collector, and I never was.
It's not about being better. I know we had talked about, and I'm just going to say it out loud so everybody knows there's pressure on you. Tom has been wanting to do with chick tracks, which I still call farm fights.
I love it.
And nothing has happened since then. And I'm like, I'm going to push him until it happens.
Tom, you can do it.
Okay. She's going to clip this and just show it to me over and over. Like, Jim asked you said you could do it.
I know you're going to be so proud of yourself doing it. You're holding yourself back.
I've never done it. It's not that I like did it and I didn't think it was good.
You've never done a podcast before. You never done stream.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah, that's not a valid excuse.
No.
Jim's our guest. Let's talk to him, huh? Yeah.
But now I have another accountability partner to keep you accountable.
Fair. That's fair.
Oh man, I love this. Do you feel like making the comics around the different characters that you, when you start learning about them, that they help you grow too? Like diving deeper into those traits?
I think this whole experience has helped me grow a lot. I don't know if it's, specifically the characters, because the experiences are so interwoven.
Mm-hmm.
Working with the team at VeeFriends, the cartooning team, I always say like the best hour of my week is we meet every Monday and we basically look at like, what'd you do all week? And it's great. We did it today. I love it. But like all these layers are together. And honestly, everyone that I've worked with at VeeFriends has been fantastic. Not just the creative, the cartoonists, but everybody on the team. And just having that experience has been kind of very different for me. I had a day job before I went full-time in art making. And by the time I left that day job, I worked there for 7 years. I was just convinced like all businesses, like we're ruined. We're in trouble. Like there's incompetency everywhere. Everybody seemed unhappy. And that was my experience as an adult working, for 7 years. I mean, it seems like this long time to be in a place where it seemed like nobody wanted to be there. And over time, I have done freelance work for companies where I've gotten to go in and be like, wow, this is actually totally different. Everybody here seems really competent or really wants to be here. And VeeFriends, is probably the longest I've worked anywhere as an adult since 2007. And again, everybody seems very good at what they do. They seem very happy for each other's successes. And it's just an amazing experience. I don't know if I would have even wanted to be freelance or, leave that kind of environment if that is what my first job had been like.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I've grown, I think I grow a lot through the experiences with the other VeeFriends team members. But, and thinking about these characters, yeah, probably, yes, I would say, to answer your question, the more I think about it, yes. I spend a lot of time thinking about VeeFriends characters and stories in which we get to see their exploits. And, I still draw like on paper. So like when I gesture this way, I have a drawing table over here. And I always say, like, all the stuff, invoicing, you know, whatever you're doing, that's what I get paid for. And the actual drawing part I would do for free. I
Mhm.
love that part. But you turn your back to the world and you sort of enter this fantasy, you know, place in your head whenever you're making comics. And I know people that do incredible graphic novels, but are also very painful in a lot of ways. You know, sometimes they're nonfiction and they're dealing with horrendous things. And I just think, like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have that in my head all day long. And then,
Mhm.
you know, you're thinking about this stuff even when you're not working on it. And so thinking about these VeeFriends characters and their emotional intelligence and sort of the positivity, it's a good thing. It's a good thing to spend time with, you know, especially that quiet time when it's like, I'm just thinking about Confident Cobra today, you
Mhm.
know, for 6 hours. It's a very positive thing. And probably more so when I'm actually like coming up with ideas and things, you know, like we do these creative offsites. And I know different team members have talked about this before, but we'll kind of go somewhere for a couple of days and we'll just work on stories. And in advance of that, I'll kind of go through characters that I might want to work with or have ideas for. And it's kind of amazing, you know, like whenever you fixate on one of these characters and think about, you know, what kind of situation is perfect Persian cat in, or,
Mhm.
you know, helpful hippopotamus or something. And yeah, I think it's a positive place to visit and a positive place to spend time.
I think it's also like there's so many characters and there's so many traits. I feel like I've heard them, but I've never really thought about them. So I feel like I can imagine if you guys are doing these comics and like really diving into what this character is supposed to be like and how to like bring out the trait and why it's important. I feel like you start thinking about, I've never really thought about this trait. I will never really thought about what does confidence actually mean? What does it, do I have it? Like how do I portray it in a creature? Or like all the other ones too, like or adaptability of like what does that actually mean? We use these words all the time, but I feel like I never really think about, do I have that trait? And what does it look like in me versus somebody else? Because it doesn't always look the same. And I feel like
A
that's
hundred
a
percent.
super cool thing.
It's really fun when you're doing stories and you think that way. You know, like Patient Panda, it's one thing to think about, you know, the character as patient, but then like what are the situations where are
Right.
tested, right?
Hmm.
Or where you're demonstrating that or helping somebody through that. Yeah, it is pretty interesting. And there are traits that like truculent T-Rex. I don't know what truculent means.
I never heard that word before.
Yeah. So it's and there's some fun characters in there, and to go through like the list of characters and think about those traits and how they would exist, you know, in a story
Right.
situation or in a community, it can be just very entertaining in its own right.
And within defensive, I think once I like look more into the traits, I also like realize how important it is to have a balance in it. Like there are certain traits you always think they're positive, but then you realize if you have too much of any trait, it can turn negative. Like, and I think just thinking about like even like the Hyperpig was one of my favorite characters. Like when I first came in, I was like, thoughtfulness is a good thing until you do it too much and it becomes into overthinking. You know, like every trait, like, and then I went just like through different traits and realized just because it sounds positive in the first moment, if you overdo it and you don't have a good grasp on the character or on like on a trait, like it can almost be harmful for yourself. You think it's good until you overdo it. It's like the whole pendulum thing, you know, like, but it's, I've never done like thought about these things until I came into VeeFriends and like really tried to like, why do I like this character? Or like, why do I resonate with that trait? And I feel like that's really cool with the comics too, when there's a new character coming out. Like the Cobra was not really a character I thought a lot about or was on my radar a lot. And now you start thinking about it because you read the comic and like before it comes in, you have your idea, what do you think the story is going to be about? Which
Yeah.
direction is going to go? So like you can see like where your mind goes, which I feel like tells you a lot about yourself, like what you think confidence is or what it should be. And then you read a story and you're like, huh, interesting. Like it just gives you also a different, like now I get your perspective and like Gary's perspective and the team's perspective on what confidence might look like. And then you talk to other people. I talk to Tom or people in the community and like what they feel about it. And it's these conversation starters, almost these comics of like, what does confidence or adaptability means to you? And how does it show up for you? And I feel like this is such a cool thing to have with other people. It's like an instant conversation you can have.
Yeah, and I hope, you know, I like to think about things like what do VeeFriends look like in 5 years? And I hope that we see more stories of these characters that go in other directions too, because confidence, almost any of these traits, they are different to everybody, and it allows room for other storytellers to come in and tell their confident Cobra story and have a different take on confidence that is still valid and may resonate with different people, and can fit that character still. I love the idea though of, you hear whatever the next book is and then your mind starts kind of going, what does that look like? Well, what do you do in a story featuring that quality?
Especially when you see like, this cover is like, it's looking fierce. And then Jeff Darrow's was like quite fierce. And so you're thinking that this is just going to be like a bloodbath. It was, you know what I mean? Like, I think at this point we talk spoilers anyway, but we're going to get into the issue. But like, it obviously, there were things in there that I'm like, if you gave me a year, I would have never had that. That wouldn't have entered my brain, like with the piano. You know what I mean? Like, didn't expect a piano to be in the issue. So like, so fun when something like that happens, because we think like the traits, we have our own version in our heads, right? Confidence, like puffy chest maybe, and you're thinking like it's one thing, but it's like more of a protective thing here and standing up, for a reason, rather than just being like, I think of like almost arrogant, with confidence. And it's just, I feel like there can be like a cliche or like what you think is going to happen. And if it was that way, okay, this is what people might think it would be. So how can we kind of still surprise them and take it a completely different direction? And honestly, every single issue has not been at all what I expected, which is awesome.
Yep.
That's nice to hear too. Like, I'm a movie fan, and often now I can't resist watching movie trailers, especially if it's something that I know I want to see or whatever. And they give away so much. It's rare now to go see a movie where it's like, I really don't know what to expect. So that's cool if these comics are delivering some of that, surprising or just changing your expectations or whatever. I appreciate that.
Was there any thought of like with Jeff's cover, it's like, this is not an indication of really what's going on in the issue. Like, does anything like that come up, or are you just like, that's so cool?
I do think there's a kung fu influence on the story, and Jeff's a huge kung fu fan. So part of my pitch to him doing a cover was, to kind of channel some of that kung fu influence. I do think there's a tone there that there's some conflict between Mentor Mongoose and Cobra. So Jeff certainly, kind of turns it up to a 10. But that's what he does, so I don't feel like it was out of line or out of place.
Oh no.
Even if it's not exactly how that story unfolds, I do think it's a fun kind of version of those characters, and sort of they are at odds, for sure. And so there is some threat of like, are they going to go? Is this going to be the big showdown? And who knows? Maybe one day it will be.
Sure.
So maybe Jeff's cover will make sense one of these days. I have to see if I can convince Gary that we put an eye patch on Mongoose, maybe, if we go that route.
Yeah.
But hopefully it's not too far off from the story,
No, and I hope I didn't, make that seem like that was the case. Kind of what I meant was just, it was so, not that it was misleading. That's not what I mean. But, people might expect a big battle. And it's, like, okay, because we know that in nature, snakes and mongooses don't really get along, right?
Okay.
So we kind of are expecting this, like, and you go in it, and it's awesome that it wasn't directly just a bloodbath fight over, 10, 12 pages. It was so much more layered than that, while still having like, they're still at odds. They're still, like you said, they're still enemies as part of their innate nature. And the cool layered part is that, at least for Mongoose, it's like, you can't, not only can you not, you have to do the opposite and get along and teach. And it's like, that's just so cool. And that's why I think that not misleading, but also very, very unexpected in the best way.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that.
I want to go back to something, because you said that it's going to be exciting when other artists take on these stories and put their own spin on it. What I find fascinating, and what I think we want people to do more, when Tom and I talk about these stories, you read so much personal things into these. There is so much interpretation that I will read a story different than Tom sometimes. Like, I think that's so fascinating, but it's so fun to have this podcast, to have different perspectives and to talk to other people when we want them to talk even more about it, because you really get a good sense of, like, first of all, how somebody else thinks. And I feel like it opens your mind up for how other people think. And it just opens up your mind. Something I would never think about, because, like, I'm from a different country and I'm female versus male. Like, there's so different perspectives that we have, and like being able to share them with each other, you realize that you read more into a story than is actually there sometimes, which is fascinating for me. And I feel like comics are such a good medium for that, because it gives you the pictures and it gives you some text, but it leaves so much for interpretation. Like, I will see different little details than Tom does, just because of like where our mind is right now, what we're focusing on right now. But it really helps you to understand. Like, I sometimes go back after our episode and was like, why did I see that and wasn't able to see what Tom saw? Just to like help myself understand myself a little bit better. And I feel like it teaches you a little bit of like, what is my focus on right now? Like, I feel it can really teach you a lot about yourself and about the other person too. Like, there's things that came up in conversations Tom and I would have never had without these comics. Like, something personal will come up, something we connect to our personal lives. And I feel like it's so cool to have like, and I think the same probably happens when you have like watch a movie that the same person watched, like another person watched. But like, it just gives you the starting point of like having a really good discussion.
Yeah, I think art really functions like mirrors. You know, if you go like I don't know how much time you guys go to museums or anything, but one of my favorite activities, like we have a nice museum here in Pittsburgh, the Carnegie Museum of Art. I'll have friends come through town and it'll be like, let's go to the museum, you know, like artist friends. And it's incredible, like what paintings they are into. And it completely, you know, it'll be stuff that I've walked by 50 times and never thought twice about. And then it's my friend's favorite painting in his life. And it's the first time he's ever seen it in person. And, you know, it enriches my life to experience that, because now I have this experience and a different perspective on this painting. Like movies, you know, like you said, Anne, I think that happens all the time, where maybe you identify with one character and Tom would identify with another character, or a different point of view of, you know, how that character is behaving or whatever, based on your experiences. I know as I get older, when I was younger, I would watch movies where like the protagonist is sort of suffering for their, whatever their obsession is, their art, their sport, something, romance, you know, whatever the case is. And as an older person now, I look at that and I feel tragic, you know, like it's not romantic to me anymore. You know, I think about lost time or, you know, I can see the self-destructive behavior in the youth, you know, like don't do that. But it's a totally different reaction than whenever I was 20 and watching that same movie and sort of identifying with this protagonist that, you know, couldn't achieve their dream or whatever fast enough. So yeah, I think that's really, again, I love hearing this from both of you, because it's the best thing. Like, you know, I'm a fan first. So like I had these experiences with the comics I love, the movies I love, the stories I love. So if something I'm doing is creating that kind of effect for anybody else, like that's about the nicest thing someone could say to me. So thank you.
It's been really fun. I feel like for both of us to do this podcast and just having the conversation with a lot of people in the community, what they take out of it, what they read into it. And like, I think we said it at some point, like it's almost like mini therapy sessions. Like you said, it's a mirror. Like you will read something into it. Like my favorite comic, at some point, VeeFriends did like a real, like what the story is about. And I was like, no, it's not. That's not what it is about for me. You know, like, but that's the cool thing. Like different people you're going to have your favorite panel in it. You have a favorite part in it, or like, because it means something to you. And I think I didn't know that comics could do that to you. I thought it's just like a fun thing to read, like it's just entertainment. But I think how much that can actually bring to you, especially for like with VeeFriends Comics in particular, having these traits and these stories and these lessons that they are teaching in a fun way. It's not preachy or anything. I think it really brings something up inside of you, and then having the moment to sit with it and just like, why did that come up for me? Why was that funny to me? Or why did I not like this? Was it something like I'm not ready for? Like why do certain comics resonate with me and others don't? And I feel like that's really cool as, like you said, like a mirror coming back. But it's also cool to be okay with that. We always talk about there's certain comics that resonate with me more than with Tom or vice versa. And us being okay with that. It's never about that the comic isn't good or the story isn't good. It's like there might be some lessons that I already learned, so they don't resonate with me, versus others that really sit with me. Where I'm just like, something came up and I was like, man, I didn't know that was there. Like, I just didn't know that comic can do that to you. And I feel like that's really cool for me to see that that's possible.
Yeah, that's great. I for a long time I've viewed comics as just an art form, like painting, like filmmaking, photography, sculpture, anything. And through that lens, I believe comics are capable of anything these other art forms are capable, whether it's creating emotional reactions in people, creating these moments of self-realization. And not all comics are doing that, and not all comics are aiming for that.
Right.
But it is something that the art form has the potential to do. And, this is a good time to be a comics reader. If you had started reading 30 years ago, Anne, it would have been a very different landscape of what was out there. The comics have evolved so much that now we have comics for almost any interest, and really any demographic. Whether you're looking for sort of escapist, entertainment, or you're looking for something deeper, like we have that now. A decent comic book store has that, and it's kind of incredible. Like my friends and I, whenever we're talking comics, we talk about how this is like the real golden age of comics, because there are just comics for everyone now, and it was not that way not very long ago.
Which is funny. I think we talked about it when either way Ellie or Kate was on here, that I didn't know that about comics. Like growing up, I thought comics were superheroes and that's it. So that's why I never got into it. I wasn't into superheroes, wasn't my thing, so I never picked up a comic book. I just didn't know anything else existed besides that. And now, like, my daughter is more into comics, and like we go to the book fair and stuff, and we'll pick up different ones, and like Tom will like tell me about different comics, and like through VeeFriends and stuff, like I realized that it's more than just the superheroes. But it's just, I think most people talk about the superhero stuff because that's the big comics, that's the one that sell for a lot, and like have like the spin-off movies and stuff.
I was going to say they have the good PR team with all these movies and things.
But it's cool that slowly everything else, and not saying that they're bad, they're good too. I know like Spider-Man is much deeper than just like who was it? I think Rob Liefeld recently had like 1 or 2 months ago, like a reel about Spider-Man and kind of going through the story a little bit, and I was like, I didn't know it was that deep. Like, and it made me feel like I'm more interested in it now, because it wasn't just about like him jumping around between the city, like fighting somebody. It was like the actual story of him and like the tragedy and all that kind of stuff around it, and that made me more interested in it. And I love seeing that it goes deeper into the story, and through things like social media, people can share what it's actually about. Because now I'm more likely to pick up a comic if somebody tells me about it.
Yeah, and I think a character like Spider-Man, like Batman, Superman, these characters that have been around for, 30, 40, 50 years or more, you can assume there's more to them, to survive generation after generation and still connect with audiences. There's more in there. There are some great Spider-Man comics. There really are.
There's some really bad ones too, right? There are really corny ones that are the things that you think they are, where it's just spandex and punching and pow boom and that's it, and it's very, very shallow. But there are ones that that can make you cry for sure.
Yeah, and Anne, you talk about connecting with some of the characters, and I don't want this to become the Spider-Man podcast, but part of Spider-Man's appeal when he first shows up is he is this like nerd, ostracized teenager, lives with his aunt, totally uncool, no money. And that sounds cliche now, but that's not what superhero comics were like whenever it was first published. And so like, a lot of comic book readers are stereotypically these nerds and antisocial and maybe bullied. And Peter Parker was really like, wow, I'm seeing myself on those pages. You know, this person who's reading comics already and kind of feels alone. Now they've got a character that looks like them and is sort of going through the same stuff as them. So yeah, it's comics are full of great stories. You know, I'd love to say it's just VeeFriends. We're the only ones with good stories. But the truth is, you know, comic books have been around now for over 100 years, more or less, in the format that we think of comic books. And for that format to persevere kind of speaks to, yes, this art form and the history of this very commercial medium. It has told good stories generation after generation. And that's the reason comic books are still around, because they don't make sense the way they did when they were first introduced. You know, like I was on a call today with a printer, one of the VeeFriends printers, and we were talking about some different stuff that we are looking to make. And they were saying how weird the size of comic books are, like the format, like it's a 2:3 ratio, very unusual. You know, magazines are sort of like 3:4 or 4:5. The comic book is this really weird format, and it's the way it is because it was the cheapest thing they could produce whenever they started making them. Literally, it was like almost free. The price didn't go up for like 30 years because it was such a cheap format. And now we don't even use the same presses to print them. And so like they exist because of the nostalgia and the legacy of that format. It's no longer the function of the format. And it's kind of cool, you know, like people for, like I said, generations have found something meaningful in those pages. And, you know, I hope that we continue to produce that kind of meaning.
I feel like, yeah, when you said that people saw themselves in Spider-Man, I feel like that's my favorite comics, and VeeFriends are the ones where I see myself. Like something I've been through or I'm going through right now, like you just instantly connect with it because you understand it. You like, you know how it feels like in these couple of pages. I mean, comics aren't long, you know, like, but in these couple of pages, we always talk about Versatile Viking. The first 2-3 pages of that, I think some of our favorites, just because it goes through this dark time, and we all have been through that. Like sometimes you just have to go through a dark time in your life. You don't know what's on the other end. You just know there needs to be a change, and you have to go through it. And it's gonna get better, hopefully, but you don't know. And like that is such an underrated comic. And with it, again, like I think it's the first 2, maybe 3 pages where you're just like, you just sit with that. You're just like, man, I felt that in the art, in the darkness of it, in the couple of sentences in it. And it's like, it's just underrated how much you can connect to these characters or to these comics that you feel like, no, these are stories about people. I know these are like made up characters and stuff, but like they're teaching lessons about like what you've been through and how you get through it, and that everybody else is going through it too. And if everybody else can do it, you can do it too. Like that's really the lessons behind that. But like the scene part, like I think is a big thing for. I think most people just want to be seen, like that you mattered in this life, and that people understand how you feel, that others feel the same, so you don't feel like I'm alone in this. And I feel like almost every comic has like one panel where I'm like, that I needed that one. That was if it's a picture, if it's a sentence, like I needed that. And I feel like that's. Just keep going with that.
It's one of my
I want to see you isolate those panels and see what they look like, you know, from each of these books. Whenever you mention, you know, maybe it's a picture or it's a dialogue or a line, it would be interesting to see that and kind of like see the different ways that it can express that moment, that connection. I don't know. I think that'd be really interesting just to see that, like, sometimes it is purely a visual moment, or you know, sometimes it is this great bit of dialogue that rings true or something.
It's funny, but Tom and I can sometimes now tell, I think this is your favorite, it's going to be a favorite panel because we know each other well enough now, like what like speaks to us, and like, oh, I knew that would be your favorite panel. Yeah. Like, which is fun because like, again, like you get to know each other through a comic. Like, and you would have told me that a year ago, I would have like, no, I wouldn't.
And because I've, you know, Anne from the Viking, and she'll always pick, and it's like I've noticed the correlation of the the piece of dialogue that got to her. And then I was just like, I think I know a comic that you might like outside of VeeFriends, and I mailed it to her, and she read it, and then we talked about it on the last episode. And I think that, and then we're like, oh, we're now going to start, once she's done with it, we're going to mail it to someone else, and it's going to become someone, people were like, I want it, and I'll do this, so mail it to me after. So
that's really cool.
Yeah. Which is cool to just like go out of when you first sent it to me, I was like, are you insane? Do you think you have that much time? And then I read I think it's 3, maybe 4 stories. I read the first 2. After reading the first one, it's like, it's so fast. Like it's very minimal text. Like it's a lot, just the pictures. And like I was so fast into it. I'm like, okay, I can do this. But like when you first sent it to me, I was like, insane.
I was overwhelmed.
That artist is very prolific and has a lot of work out there. So if you finish that and you really like it, you could track down other work that Jeff Lemire has done.
I love his art. I talked to Tom about last week that because it's so simple, I already know like what kind of tool he used to draw, and like it makes me want to draw. I was like, and that's just like such a cool thing. I feel like just like, now I want to do it.
Do you draw at all, Anne?
Not as much as I should.
There you go.
Like I have a background in like graphic design and stuff. Like I've always drawn like through my life. I can't draw people for the life of me. Like I just hands, fingers, faces. I just can't. I like drawing, but I'm better at just like looking at it and like copying it. That I'm great at. But like once I have to like switch the character's pose, I'm like, oh, fucked.
Well, hopefully we'll continue to bring different styles to VeeFriends, and you may find some style at some point that really speaks to you. I always think about like newspaper comics and things like Peanuts or something. It's almost completely abstract from a person, and yet we can all look at, Peanuts may be the greatest comic strip ever made. Not great drawings, there's a nostalgic connection to those. There's a lot of meaning in those drawings. I love those drawings. But if you think of like, oh, I took a figure art class, Peanuts is not going to score very well, so it's interesting with comics because the art is super important, but it's not that art needs to be drawn any specific way or to a degree of like, oh, the anatomy has to be perfect. It's like, no, it doesn't. In fact, it might be boring the closer you get to that realistic style. And when you start looking at more comics, you'll see just how far people abstract a figure or any element really that's drawn on the page. Like great comics have completely spanned a wide spectrum from stick figures to just very creative interpretation of humans and space and perspective and things like that. So
I'm always so envious of people who do like 3 lines and it looks like something. I'm like, I can do this, and then I sit down and I'm like, no, I can't. It's like, man, it looked so easy, and then I did it and it did not look like that. Like, you know what I mean? Like those people who just, even like with his comic, is like, it's very simple. Like it's not anatomically correct. And I was like, and then you try it and you're like, yep, nope. Because I feel like I'm also an overthinker. Like I want to make it right. And I was like, just get over it.
I'll tell you a secret though. Those drawings are not the first time he drew those. He's been doing that for thousands of hours. So, don't be too hard on your first attempt at that kind of drawing.
That's such a good point. That's such a good point.
I just remember Tom is part of To the Moon. He has a little thing. I don't know, a year or so ago, you guys had DJ on, and he did like a drawing thing with the community. Oh, yeah. And I remember that. And that was such a cool, where he said, just draw scribbles and now look at it. What do you see in it? And now make something out of it. And that was so much fun. And like, it got me out of my, oh, I have to draw a bunny, or I have to do something. I just like draw a scribble, and whatever you see, that's what you're going to make out of it. Maybe we need to do a drawing thing on here too, like a drawing lesson. So you're just like wild.
There's one of my favorite cartoonists is Linda Barry, and she's done a couple of like how-to books. One of them's called Syllabus. She teaches, I think, University of Wisconsin, and she has all these ideas about sort of drawing and storytelling and making comics. And they're not at all about like the drawing has to be a certain way. They're much more about like, remember whenever you were 5 and you drew and what that felt like, and what do you remember from that time period, like really kind of evoking a different drawing experience. Like AI comes up a lot with art, like I often get asked that, and here I am, you guys were nice and didn't ask me anything about it, and I'm bringing it up. But I've talked about it a lot where, like, I'm not looking for a tool that makes the comic for me, like the drawing part is like my favorite moments, is actually the drawing. And if you can find that, it makes, I think a lot of times we sit down to draw and we do want it to be a bunny, or we want it to be a car, or we want it to be something really specific, as opposed to like just have the experience of like drawing some shapes, and then you see something like you said, and but also having that moment of like you're sitting there for 20 minutes and you're just kind of moving a little bit, and kind of in this quiet state. And it's not necessarily what the drawing looks like after that 20 minutes as much as it is the whole 20-minute experience of just, being in that moment at the time. And when you're a kid, like I remember drawing fondly whenever I was little. Like I always say, I just never stopped drawing. When you're 5, everybody, all your classmates, you all draw, you have art class in kindergarten or whatever. And then by the time you're in 6th grade, like I was the weirdo, I was the last kid still drawing.
Right.
But whenever you're 5 and you're drawing with your friends, it's this like fun. There's not really pressure. I don't see people getting mad because their house, the square isn't very square or something like that. And then we lose that somewhere. And I don't know what that is, like give yourself grace and, enjoy the 20 minits more than like, I have to see what it looks like at the end. Like, who cares? What are we going to do with that? It's sort of that little bit of time that you get to sit there and draw that is the experience. The rest of it, you're going to put it on your refrigerator. Like,
Right.
What's the difference?
I think that's what I loved. I used to work with 3 to 4 year olds, preschool kiddos. And I think it gave me a different perspective of how much we overthink things or how much we put into certain boxes. Like seeing them draw or create or like that. That's just such a like every single one of my kiddos drew. There wasn't one kiddo who said, I can't draw. Not a single one. Every one of them was an artist. Everyone would try it. Nobody like it just shows you that at some, like you said, like at some point we lose that, whatever it is. And maybe somebody telling us we're not good at it, or like us, like I still can't wrap my head around that something like art class you get grades for. You shouldn't, because it's so subjective. But it really taught me to be more open-minded of like, we are all creative people. We are literally born like that. And at some point, some of us get nurtured and we keep doing it our whole life, and others just get told, don't do that, or it's not going to make enough money, or whatever it is that keeps us from not doing it. But we all have in it, like creative in different ways.
Yeah. And it's so tragic when you describe that, because it's when you're teaching those kids or you're watching those kids, they're enjoying that. So whenever we all stop drawing, it's not just we're not drawing anymore or getting better at drawing or anything. We're also losing that moment of joy that like everybody loved this whenever they were 4.
Right.
It's not like you outgrow that part. Like you said, it's other factors that discourage you from doing it for one reason or another, but you're robbing yourself of that joy. Like that may be something you could tap into for the rest of your life. After a hard day of work, you get to sit down and draw something abstract. Who knows? Just the process. I used to do, and I still do sometimes, I would do like ballpoint pen drawings, and they're very meditative because if you want an area to be like solid red, it takes a while with a ballpoint pen, kind of hatching and going back and forth. And it is this like really meditative process. And, if you quit drawing whenever you were 5, well, that's not something you get to tap into then whenever you're 35.
I think part of it is too that, and I hope it's different for the generation growing up, that you don't continue doing something if you're not going to work on it. I think now it's different. We realize you can have a job and you can have hobbies.
Yes.
Like just because you love drawing doesn't mean you have to do it as a job. There's plenty of artists who are really, really good and could probably make a living out of it, who decide, I don't want it as a job. I don't want to have to do it. I just want to just do it for the sake of doing it because it gives me joy. And I feel like being able to nurture that and keep going with that, I think is super important. I think this new generation might have a little bit more of a chance of being okay with there's my job, and then there's something I just love doing because it makes me feel good and it's good for me.
Yeah, I hope so. And I've met people like that. So I know that exists, and I hope it's spreading. Um,
Yes.
one other thing that Linda Berry taught me, through her speaking and books and things like that, she would compare scientists' drawings to kindergartners' drawings, and then she would project them, and you would see them, and they were indistinguishable. And her idea is that drawing is sort of this way that we try to express ideas, right? It's not an alphabet. We're not writing it down, and it's not necessarily a drawing of something that, like a still life that I'm looking at and recording, but it's more abstract of, like, literally it's this undocumented language or something, of like thought, like, how do I capture this thought? And it's always stuck with me. I think I heard her say that 15 years ago, but it's always stuck with me, this idea of there is such a value in drawing, I believe, and yet it's not a skill that we really learn. Most schools maybe don't even have an art class, let alone that it would be part of something that we would be educated, throughout our education. And that would be just one more method that we might be able to record ideas or form thoughts, that are hard to describe otherwise. And sadly, like, it's not really a skill that we walk around with or that most people have access to. And that always bothers me because, like, it seems like it's some part of our brain that most of us just aren't accessing.
I mean, if you look at cave drawings,
Yes.
art has always been there. That's how we communicated when we didn't have a language or didn't know how to communicate with each other. Like, art has always been something. Like, you can sit somebody in front of a painting from 10 different countries. None of them speak a language, and they all can understand it. Like,
Yeah.
art just has that you don't need a language for it to understand it. And I think that's the cool thing about comics. And, like, it's going to be interesting to see when VeeFriends grows and having these comics in English. I mean, English is still the world language. Most people are going to be able to read them and understand them. Maybe not as in depth. Like, looking back at, like, growing up in Germany, we had English from 5th grade on. Would I understand everything in depth? Probably not, but I would understand the gist of it, and the pictures would help me understand the story. And I feel like that's the cool part about that VeeFriends chose comics as a medium to bring out the stories of the different characters now, because I can give these to my niece in Germany who learns English, and she will understand them because of the pictures, and she can make up, even if there's a sentence she doesn't quite understand, the picture is going to show her what it means. I feel like that's the cool part about a comic versus, like, maybe a full-on book where it's just a story, or even like a movie or something. I feel like you just have more time to absorb it. A movie is very, very fast. Like, if you don't get it in the moment, it's gone, especially if you don't know the language. But, like, a comic, I feel like you can sit with it. If you don't understand the sentence specifically, you can usually pick up what's happening in it just from the picture. And I think that's why comics are such a cool medium.
They're extremely effective for that. And, for a long time, comics were sort of pushed out, like after the 1954 Senate subcommittee hearings about, their contribution to juvenile delinquency and the comics code. They were relegated to, like, barely literate children or something like that. But at the same time that they were sort of pushed out of schools and libraries, the US government was using comics to teach armed forces everything, like maintenance on vehicles, strategies for, just literally everything. And Will Eisner was the artist who was doing that. And that wasn't random. It wasn't because, some general liked comics. It was based on a lot of studies. And this was the most effective way to teach virtually any subject matter. And these were comics for adults, for soldiers and enlisted people. And yet it took forever for, like, American society to kind of be like, oh yeah, comics aren't just something that, we should be confiscating and taking away from kids. Instead, this is a really effective tool for reading, for everything that comes with reading, for comprehension and all of these things. So yes, you're 100% right. And, we've talked about the chick tracks because I did a Farm Fights chick track, and it's the same principle. Like, part of the reason that guy adopted that is because he was exposed to foreign propaganda that was comics. and realized how effective they were. And so whenever he wanted to, spread his gospel, that's the format he chose. So yeah, comics they're amazing for communication. Absolutely amazing.
I think because of the picture, like we said, like in comic 6, so much comes through. There's the color of it, like the darkness of it, that a text might not always just show that, but the picture shows you how you're supposed to read it. I think that's just a big part of it, but you're just like, so I can see like how propaganda and stuff can really take a next step because of using certain colors or using certain facial expressions, like it just changes how you read something, because you're instantly like, okay, like, am I standoffish now? Am I relaxed now? Just like color theory is a whole another thing of like how much that can change how you read into something. And people who use it well, like, can really change how you take something in, which is crazy. And people don't know that. That's the thing too, like, you don't know that that's happening to you. Like, it just happens.
It's just today I was thinking about parts of comics that I don't want a reader to be conscious of. So for instance, I never want you to be unclear of who's speaking in one of my comics. I don't want you to stop and be like, oh, let me trace the tail of this word balloon because I'm not sure who this is. So I try to arrange word balloons so that it's almost thoughtless as a reader, and color is one of those elements where I started studying color in earnest probably 20 years ago because printing changed and I could afford to do color comics. Up to that point, if you did indie comics, they were black and white because it was cost prohibitive otherwise. And then it was like, I have to learn color, and I'm still learning. I feel like you could study color your entire life and maybe not master it, but it's pretty exciting. It gives you sort of this, there's always more to learn when it comes to art. You're never perfect at it, right? It's constantly a study, something you can study your whole life, but the color is so powerful. I think it may be the most powerful element on the comics page. If you go to a comic book store and start flipping through comics, I think color is the first thing that sort of, it used to be the line art, because the color was pretty subdued, but now it's like the color is the loudest part. And if you find somebody who's understands color theory, they can do a lot of storytelling. Pixar released a book about this thick, and it's their color scripts, they call it, for like, I don't know, the first 10 Pixar movies or so. I can't remember how many there were, but it was fascinating. You go through and they just have like 4 or 5 rows of colors for like scene by scene. It was something that I guess they would do even before they actually wrote the detailed script. Wow. And it's fascinating to see just like how much storytelling exists just from these relatively simple color studies. But, I feel like Pixar is one of those storytellers, as an organization where it was like, they just did nothing but great work for a long time, maybe still to today. And, from the very beginning, they were looking at color as like, this is this powerful element. Let's get this right.
Even the lack of color. I remember like we have a new comic book store in my town. So I went in and like, I picked up Daredevil because it's Tom's favorite. It's like, okay, we have something to connect about. But like one I picked by cover because I don't know about the story. So I'm like, I'm a cover picker. And like one of them was, I think it was Scotty Young. Like as like a mini, first of all, I like the figure, but it was just the mini Daredevil and the rest of the page was white. And that drew me to it. Like when you go through like a comic box and you just like pick them all up and you go through and it's like, it just catches your eye because it doesn't have color besides the character. Like even not picking a color, I remember in Gary B, there's this one page where Gary B just like is by itself on the page. Like that's one of the pages I will always remember because like playing with like just empty space has such a big thing of just like, because you just like zone in on this one thing and there's nothing else to distract you. So you're just literally like, why is that there? Why is it just the character? So like it really, almost like the lack of color sometimes can play into it too.
That's a great moment in that comic too. Like that open space in that moment, like there's a story reason for it, like it's this graphic impact. If you were just flipping through and not reading, you would pause because it's so dramatic visually, but it's also paired with like a story reason for it. So,
Mhm.
yeah, well done, Chris. Chris Fasten is amazing.
Don't forget to subscribe, follow, read more comics, talk about them, share them on socials, not just the hits, but also the stories. They matter.
If that was a panel or a word book, I would have known that that's Anne's favorite.
Yeah.
The comic doesn't work until you read it. You know, like that's how a comic works. That should be what we need to do next. You know, we have the quiz for which VeeFriends are you. We need to have the quiz for which VeeFriends comic should you read first.
She gets very angry about the reading of it.
Talk to me about the page after he get bitten by a snake, because it goes downhill fast. Manuel said, we often hear about DJ's and Gary's vision for the comics, but what is yours?
Don't wait too long, you know. Print runs are going up. Back issues are disappearing. Now is your chance. I love the collector part, and I think collectors are really important, but I want readers too. You know, I want people to fall in love with these stories and these characters.